Movember, day 23, and tonight for the video I'd like to pull back into the resources of Carnes and Stephanie Carnes and John Bailey and talk about a slide I passed through quickly, but I just want to spend a little bit more time explaining. So generally, when we do addiction treatment work and we come in and we're looking at our problems and the excuses we've got and the secrets that no one knows about and the consequences, we generally arrive at this. How do we get this way? By this time, it must be clear to you whether or not you have a problem. Typical questions emerge with the realization that you do have a problem. First, you wonder how this happened to you, and following is some brief and relevant factors, and that's what we're going to look at, just the different things that you would want to consider. Now, Carnes says here, fewer dopamine receptors, novelty gene, family members with addiction. So how he explains it here is addicts typically inherit a genetic structure that predisposes them to addictions in general. Scientists believe there is a problem with the way an addict's brain processes neurochemicals such as dopamine and serotonin, often associated with pleasure, pain, and relief in the brain. There may actually be a problem with the way the synapses fire in the brain or how connections are made. Regardless of the reason, we do know that part of the problem is going to be genetic. And so that, depending on the therapist you see, depending how much time will be spent here, but it's really useful knowledge to understand this, and certainly in these books they take you through it. The next thing that he gets you to have a look at is attachment issues. We certainly know now the buzzword around addiction treatment is, addiction is about isolation and recovery is about connection. And so what they're generally saying here is the work of John Bowlby early on, and then therapies like emotional focus treatment techniques and the EFT treatment as Dr. Sue Johnson, they definitely go into this. And most trauma-focused therapists will have an understanding of your attachment and be able to do assessments on what attachment style am I, and it'll give you a chance to identify in different attachments where are you and what issues might it have with your addiction that's happening at the same time. I did a video earlier in the Movember series on different types of attachment. Now, the next one that we would look at is learning and modeling. Growing up in a family in which adults had excessive behavior, the modeling confirms that this is how to do life and handle feelings. And Carnes goes through this in a few ways. He says, often addicts come from families in which other members suffer from addictions. Parents, siblings, or extended family members will have types of addictive and compulsive behavior. And Pia Mellody always said, look for work addiction or busyness, because people will have those distress reduction behaviors. Don't just look for your standard addiction responses. This increases the probability of actually developing addictive behaviors through modeling, family dysfunction, and child abuse. All of these can also activate a predisposed nature. She goes on to talk a little bit about other ways here that in families they're going to impact you, and a failure to sustain intimacy is one. One of the primary failures that plays a role in making an addict is the inability to sustain intimacy. Addiction, in many ways, is about a failure to bond, which is why we consider it an intimacy disorder. Sex addicts also tend to come from rigid and authoritarian families, or at least some members are. This result is a resistance to being accountable. And further, the presence of extreme sexual negativity for sex addicts will likely intensify sexual obsession. For example, living in a religious tradition that does not support healthy sexual attitudes can create obsessive thinking. So there's a lot that you're going to explore in therapy around this issue. Next is childhood trauma and stresses. Carnes here, he mentions living in fear or chaos leads to children living in crisis mode. The brain functions differently. We're in our limbic system a lot. Sexual, physical or emotional abuse or neglect, early losses or catastrophes, and that's what we look for. So childhood abuse is a factor for many, leading to extreme reactivity and hypersensitivity to pain and emotional upset. Some sex addicts actually repeat abusive themes in their sexual acting out. For some of us, our arousal templates are linked, and trauma is linked to sexuality, and we need to go through that really critically and supportively in recovery to get a good sense of what that is. The next thing we look at is exposure. So our teenage life, teen drinking, smoking, drug use, and internet use, gambling, sexual, physical, or emotional abuse at this time, and the impact of culture. As teens start to move away from the family system and identify themselves in the culture they're in, we really need to make sure that we're keeping an eye on that and helping them. And when we're looking at our own addiction, going back to that time and looking at what was the habitat I was in at that time, how did I develop, how did these things actually impact me, and that becomes a big part of understanding, look, where did this thing start for me as a way of relieving the pain? When did the distress reduction tools start to, or behaviors start to come in? The next one is adult trauma and stresses. And here Kahn says war, natural disasters, divorce, loss of a partner, loss of a job, victim of a violent crime, loss of a child, or chronic illness or disability. And he goes on in the book to say depression frequently accompanies both sex addiction and sexual anorexia. Feelings of despair intensify both addiction and anorexic obsessions. High stress situations such as attending medical school, dealing with business problems, or facing extreme danger such as warfare can create addicts where there was no other predisposing factors. Early exposure to intense sexual digital media may also be a precursor to sex addiction. Human brains did not develop ready to process endless novel sexual stimuli that is available at any time on portable devices as we do these days. And also being around, again, other addictions might also participate in an addictive sexual behavior. So if you've got a drug or alcohol problem, we could also see it then start to predispose us to a sex addiction. Addictions can actually migrate from one form to another because really it's the same impact on the brain's reward system. So for this video, I hope that those sorts of areas of inquiry might be something you want to take up with your therapist, or start to get some literature. If you identified with any of those areas of, look, how did I get this way? Then please take that into your healthcare support system and get the help that you deserve. So that's the end of tonight's video. Be gentle with your heart. I look forward to seeing you again tomorrow in the next video.